The Oklahoma Sooners are investing in recruiting more than ever before, and it's paying off. We'll tell you why on tonight's episode of Locked On Sooners.
You are Locked On Sooners, your daily podcast on the Oklahoma Sooners, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Sooner Nation? Welcome to Locked On Sooners. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for making Locked On Sooners your first listen every single day. We're free and available on all podcast platforms and on YouTube. Hit that subscribe button. Let us know how you feel about the show in the comments as well. I'm John Williams. You can follow me on Twitter at John9Williams. My buddy here is Josh Helmer. You can follow him on Twitter at JoshOnRef. And as Josh mentioned on the jump, the Oklahoma Sooners are spending. They're spending big on the recruiting trail, among the top 10 schools in America, according to a USA Today report. They're number 8 in the list. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, number 9 in the rankings, spending a total of $7.53 million over the last 6 seasons, Josh. And it looks like it's paying off.
It is. It's clearly paying off. The amount that Oklahoma's spending, if these figures are right, I always kind of wonder about these figures too. The way that they get reported, John, I feel like there's other ways to report them maybe elsewhere. So if they're not strictly reported as this is a recruiting expense, it falls into the financial budget somewhere. Now, where does it fall? I'll admit, and I'll cop to being a little bit skeptical sometimes of what these numbers look like. But if
these are the reported recruiting expenses,
right? And if we treat these as gospel, reported recruiting expenses,
so probably not.
I think there's ways to shape how much it looks like maybe you're spending or you're not. But let's treat it as gospel, right? And what we see from the gospel of Oklahoma football is they're spending about $1.5 million more than they've been spending on average. So that is, or at least $1 million more than they've been spending on average. And that is, John, obviously a substantial amount when you look at where they fall in the overall pantheon of college football. And I don't know if it's just strictly the spending element for OU. I would have to chalk it up to just Brent Venables and the staff themselves doing a fantastic job, John. But I mean, look, there's multiple correlations here that say Oklahoma's spending more. And oh, by the way, they just reeled in the best recruiting class in some time. And in some ways, I think the point system says it's the best ever.
Yeah, based on 247 Sports, it is the best in the modern recruiting era. What they did in the 2023 recruiting cycle, they spent $2.63 million according to this report, which if you look at the top 10 schools in spending over the last 6 years, only the Georgia Bulldogs, the Georgia Bulldogs, the Clemson Tigers, Texas A&M, those are the only schools that spent more in 2022 than the Oklahoma Sooners did. So if you're looking to get into Georgia, Alabama, and even Clemson territory back to the national title contender, you got to spend. I mean, there's a reason why Georgia's so good. They invest a lot in their recruiting. They grab top, 2 or 3 recruiting classes, and they've done it for a lot of years now. And it's what's made them arguably the best program in college football. I mean, you can't even say arguably, really. They got the last 2 national titles. So they're doing something right. They're investing in recruiting. And you don't see them doing a lot in the transfer portal. They might take a transfer portal swinger here and there, but they're not going big in transfer portal because they don't have to. They've got the recruiting classes built up to such an extent that they're just, rolling guys out. They're able to replace the lost talent from within because of the investments they're making on the recruiting trail. And we know that when Brent Venables was looking at coming to Oklahoma, he had quite a few things that he wanted to see the Sooners do. One of them was facilities. The other one was investing in recruitment. And we're seeing the investment paying off. You look back to, what Lincoln Riley, or the reported expenses during the Lincoln Riley era, and the biggest season in which they spent was the 2019 season. That was $1.276 million in 2019. And that was the Spencer Rattler, Jaden Hazelwood, Theo Weiss, Trajan Bridges class, the one that was really, really strong and one of the best recruiting classes that they'd ever had. But it didn't really pay off for the Oklahoma Sooners very well because Spencer Rattler was gone. Theo Weiss, he is at Missouri, spent a year injured. Trajan Bridges, gone. Jaden Hazelwood finished his career at Arkansas. So that class didn't really pay off. Now the Oklahoma Sooners 2022 class, it's going to have to pay off for them, not just in 23, but 24, 25 as well, for them to really see like that investment make waves. Like that investment is going to come to fruition over the next few years, and it has to pay off for the Oklahoma Sooners. But it's an interesting sign of, okay, Brent Venables, he knows what it takes to play with the big dogs in the SEC, the ACC, to be a national title contender. And it looks like Oklahoma is making the investments where Venables thinks it's necessary in order to get them back to the top.
In the grand scheme of things too, John, I mean, let's just call it what it is. 2.6 million is chump change in college athletics. I mean, in the grand scheme of things, I know that that's kind of a wild thing to wrap your brain around, but with Oklahoma going to the SEC, and I know there's a buyout obviously there that you've worked, and so that puts maybe that immediate dent into the financial plans or budgeting for you. But the bottom line is you're getting paid based on television contracts more than you've ever got paid before. Attendance has not, will not, won't ever take it unless there's a substantial prolonged drought like we saw for Oklahoma football in the 90s, which, John, I know you're coming off a 6-7 season if you're an Oklahoma Sooner fan, but I just don't see that being Oklahoma's football future, where again and again, year after year, you're fighting to keep your head above 500. Oklahoma's had a lot of success. Fans are going to continue to pack Gaylord Family Oklahoma Memorial Stadium. So what I'm saying is business is good. Business is a booming. And when business is a booming, the only way to keep business a booming is to make sure that when people step on into the shop is clean, right? It's had a facelift here and there. And, and I just use that metaphor to point out, look, you're getting paid more money than ever before. So you have to invest. You have to invest in recruiting like everybody else. To me, there's no excuse. There's a lot of schools that aren't on this list, John, that are Big Ten SEC schools. And to me, how are you not toward the top of this list? There's no excuse for you not to be toward the top of this list if you're a Big Ten or SEC school, because you have a financial advantage over everybody else in college athletics. And obviously we're seeing Oklahoma, which is what we care about here on Locked On Sooners. John, they're not trying to cheap their way around any corners. They're going to pay. They're going to pay to win.
And given where Oklahoma wants to recruit, Florida, Texas, getting out to California, the East Coast, the Pacific Northwest, they're trying to uncover talent all across the country. So they're going to have higher expenses because of that. They're not just hoping to land Oklahoma and Texas regional players. They're looking to get the best players from all across the country. And that just means you're going to have to travel. That means you're going to have to send assistants and scouts out to the four corners of the United States to make sure that you're, unearthing, the talent that maybe somebody hasn't found yet, or people are not as high on, or they just haven't discovered these guys just yet. So it is interesting to see that, and it is fascinating. But again, like you mentioned, it takes money to make money. And if you want to be one of the best in the country, you got to be willing to invest in areas that's going to make you the best. And recruiting is one of those areas. And seeing them, in 2022 spend, just behind Georgia and just behind Clemson and just behind Texas A&M, I think that's a really good sign for the future of the Oklahoma Sooners on the recruiting trail in particular, meaning I think they're going to continue this trend because they saw it pay off with the stacked class that they found in 2023. Hopefully it pays off in 2024. We'll see. We're going to continue to talk about Oklahoma Sooners football coming up next. We're going to talk through, hey, are we buying or selling Oklahoma as a national title contender? College Sports Wire is selling, but we'll tell you maybe why that kind of makes sense, or do we need to buy Oklahoma? First, let me talk to y'all about FanDuel. It's almost NBA playoff time, and now is the perfect time to download the FanDuel Sports app, America's #1 sports book, because new customers get a no sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win. Just download the FanDuel Sports app. It's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Then you can bet on everything from the money line to point scores and threes drained. You can go to the Lakers, who look like they might make the playoffs, bet on LeBron James point totals. You can check in on those Cleveland Cavaliers who just got their first 50-win season and look like they are going to be a contender in the East. So go to FanDuel.com/lockedon, download the FanDuel Sportsbook app, and don't miss on your chance to get your no sweat first bet of up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook betting partner of the NBA. All right, Josh, our good buddy, Patrick Kahn, College Sports Wire regional editor, came out with a list of 12 teams that he's buying or selling as national title contenders. And the Oklahoma Sooners were one of the teams that he is selling. And here's what our good friend Patrick Kahn had to say. He said, when Lincoln Riley left for the West Coast, some thought that Brent Venables was the man for the job with the Oklahoma Sooners. I, Patrick Kahn, wasn't one of them. The team has reloaded in recruiting this past season, but it isn't enough for me to buy in after what I saw on the field a season ago. They have a tough schedule, and their only easy win might be the opener against Arkansas State. Josh, just your initial reaction to that, and is it reasonable to kind of not be sold on the Oklahoma Sooners as a contender, but to sell them like, hey, we're not buying that just yet?
Well, yeah, I think it's reasonable, but, give me the levels, Jerry, levels. Tell me what these levels are. I mean, by national contender to win the national championship? No, I'm not ready to go there with the Oklahoma Sooners, but I don't think most rational Oklahoma Sooner fans would feel that way. Obviously, you feel like, okay, because it's Oklahoma, the expectation, you want it now, right? Folks are not going to be super patient, but I think after last season, everybody can take a step back and say, okay, this is to some degree a growing process. It's not going to happen overnight. We don't think, though, there's been magic in a bottle found once before in the year 2000 for your most recent national championship. But, to me, if it's that, then okay, sure, sell it. But if you're telling me that you don't think that Oklahoma is going to be in the mix for the Big 12 championship, well, then that, John, I would take to task. That I do disagree with, because I think Oklahoma will be heavily involved in the Big 12 championship chase.
Yeah, and I do think this is more of the national landscape, but I think maybe Oklahoma as a national championship contender, maybe not, but I do think they'll be a college football playoff contender, which will put them kind of right there in that mix of teams. But again, a lot of this comes down to how much does the defense improve, because he's right. What we saw on the field a year ago isn't enough really to expect that Oklahoma is going to be able to jump back into the national championship landscape. At the same time, if what we're seeing them do is continue to build this team and build this defense, and they do make some improvement, I don't see why they can't be in the mix at the end. Will I be picking them to win a national title? No, but I could very much see them as a 10, 11 win team if they make the improvements on the defensive side of the ball that we think that they're going to make, or we expect them to make this season. Again, they were really good offensively, good enough that if the defense improves to a top 75 defense, potentially that's enough for them to win the Big 12 title and be right there in the mix for the final 4 spots in the college football playoff.
You know where TCU was in terms of total defense last season, John?
They were not good, Josh. They were not good at all.
They weren't. And I don't know off the top of my head. I'm looking. Okay. Now I found it. 95th nationally is where TCU finished in total defense. And I, full transparency, understand total offense, total defense. They don't paint the complete picture at times. Right now, if we're talking total defense and you're number 1 there, number 2, okay, that's a pretty nice picture. Total offense, if we're talking number 1, number 2, number 3 there, and the schedule's good, that paints, a pretty nice little picture. But that being said, if you're, let's say, just to use an example, 18th nationally in total offense, okay, well, show me also what the scoring offense looks like, and show me what some key third down percentage offense statistics look like. So there's ways that you can roll up a bunch of yards, but maybe have failed in different ways both offensively and defensively, right?
Like Oklahoma.
But, indeed, yeah, a lot of people would say that about Oklahoma. But, 97th nationally, when you're that low, John, it tells us that by and large, you weren't all that great defensively. You weren't one of the nation's finest. And guess what? TCU played for a national championship. So what does that tell us? Well, it tells us that you wish you had Quentin Johnston, right? And you wish you had a quarterback playing as well as Max Duggan played throughout the majority of last season. But it also tells us that marginal improvement defensively for Oklahoma, and all of a sudden, we've seen this. Oklahoma fans know this better than anybody in the Big 12, that you don't necessarily have to be the greatest defense to go win this league.
No, and
so
it's
marginal
exactly right. Yeah, it's exactly right. Where TCU was a little bit different, and we talked about it earlier this week, is that they just were a tougher team. They were more physical. They played hungrier. They played with an edge more than Oklahoma did. And you could probably say the same for Kansas State a little bit. But so I think that's where the difference lies, that, yeah, they weren't very good defensively, but their defense played in such a way that they were able to come up with key stops. They were able to come up with these clutch stops at different points in the game. Also, they probably led the nation in opposing starting quarterbacks being knocked out of games as well. So they had that going for them. But a lot of it just came down to clutch. Max Duggan was just clutch in certain situations. Quentin Johnston, the same. And the defense, they came up with key stops in big moments where Oklahoma's defense wasn't able to do that. So again, it comes down to, if they make enough improvement defensively, Oklahoma, especially in key situations on both sides of the ball, really, third down defense, third down offense, red zone defense, red zone offense, if they get better in those areas, then yeah, I could see them totally being in the mix at the end of the season. Again, it's a big if, and I don't think anybody's willing to bet their house on Oklahoma making the college football playoff, but I do think that there are going to be a lot of people that pick Oklahoma to win the Big 12, and if not, to be right there in the mix for the Big 12 title at the end of the season. I would, again, we're all projecting here, but I would bet Oklahoma is at minimum a top 4 team in the Big 12 by the end of the 2023 season, and probably going to be in the mix again for the Big 12 title game.
Here's something else to consider, though, too. If the bar is college football playoff, national championship, right? I mean, if it's teams that you legitimately think can contend for the college football playoff, that's not a very large list to begin with. Or teams, if you take it even one step further, teams that you think can win the national championship, not even, that one step further beyond, hey, get into the college football playoff versus actually go win the thing. I mean, what does that short list look like? For me, of course, you got to throw the 2-time defending national champion Georgia in, though obviously you're replacing a terrific quarterback in Stetson Bennett. So there's, at least some reasonable questions, and you're replacing, more parts and pieces, both offensively and defensively, but it's Georgia, right? They've shown you 2 years in a row that they can go win this thing. And the second year they did replace a lot to go do it, though they, obviously didn't replace the quarterback. But the way they're recruiting, the fact they've won 2 in a row, you feel like, okay, yeah, you have to start with Georgia as a legitimate factor. Michigan. I think Michigan's a factor, even though obviously that was a frustrating loss for them versus TCU in the college football playoff. But you got McCarthy back. I like the running backs at Michigan. They're the defending 2-time Big Ten champs now. So you include Michigan. I would include Ohio State, though there's probably more questions there. There are more questions there than Michigan. And then, of course, it's Alabama. And then beyond that, I mean, team number 5, it's, Florida State. I don't know that I'm ready to go there with Florida State. I like what they did, but Clemson, there's been some cracks in the foundation these last couple of seasons here with Clemson. So, I mean, it might just be those 4, John, if we're doing the who are you buying as a national contender. It might only be 4 teams.
And really, I mean, I probably would only buy 1, maybe 2, and that's Georgia and Bama. I mean, you look at the top 3 teams, arguably going into the season, Georgia, Bama, Ohio State, and all 3 of them are going to be replacing their quarterback. You talk about USC, a team that's going to get a ton of hype going into the season. Can their defense make enough stops for them to be an actual contender? I mean, it's the Lincoln Riley effect all over again for now the Trojans. So there are going to be a lot of question marks on a lot of teams as we approach the 2023 season. For me, it comes back to Georgia, Bama. who's going to be able to beat those two teams on a consistent basis? I mean, I do like Florida State. I think of the teams that we've talked about, they're the one that I'm most intrigued by because they bring back a significant part of their defense. They bring back their quarterback. They bring back a lot of their offensive weapons. I mean, they've got a lot of experience returning, and that's going to be a team to watch. Now, they're going to have to keep getting better and better as the season goes along because, I mean, Clemson's going to be a threat. North Carolina is always interesting. They got Drake May back. They're going to be able to make some noise in the ACC as well. So it's a really interesting year for college football because it might be as wide open as it's been in a while, given the quarterbacks that are having to be replaced, and Bennett at Georgia and Bryce Young at Bama and CJ Stroud at Ohio State. There's a lot of talent that is being replaced. Now you expect Georgia to have a good quarterback and Bama to have a good quarterback and Ohio State to have a good quarterback, but it'll be first year starters for those programs. And we've seen at Oklahoma that sometimes having a first year starter, no matter how highly rated they are, it has its pitfalls, whether it was Spencer Rattler or Caleb Williams. Both those guys had their struggles in their first year as a starter. So there's no, you can't just go to the bank and say, yeah, those teams are going to be just as good regardless of who they lost at quarterback. There's always a transition that takes place, and one slip up in one game or two games, and that's enough to knock them out of contention, no matter how good the rest of the squad is. So, I mean, Oklahoma could just be right there in the mix. Now they've got some questions of their own. They got a lot of questions. A lot of them pertain to the defensive side of the ball. A lot, and then you have some on the offensive side as well. But if they're able to get some of those things right and figure some of those things out, there's a chance they could be in the mix, depending on how their Big 12 schedule goes. And we've talked about the schedule. For the most part, it's fairly favorable, aside from, the road trips that they have to take to Provo, to Cincinnati, and then obviously the Red River Showdown. They've got some favorable matchups. Can they navigate it and get through the season with one or fewer losses? That's going to be the big trick.
And I would say, nationally, if we look beyond Oklahoma, for anybody that's like, yeah, well, the Spencer Rattler, Caleb Williams thing, you weren't good enough across the board roster. If you want to take OU out of the picture, look at DJ Uiagalelei at Clemson. This was supposed to be can't miss, and then all of a sudden, it is missable, right? I know that it kind of feels like five-star quarterback, what can go wrong? Well, there's case studies out there at places that, oh, by the way, before Uiagalelei, winning championships, right? And then it doesn't work at the quarterback position, and offensively things change and you're not as good. And magically, these programs that were accustomed to winning big, and I'm not going to worry about Georgia and Alabama until I've got it proven that I need to be worried about Georgia and Alabama, but I'll entertain that conversation for Ohio State.
Yeah, I mean, they didn't live up to expectations offensively even last year when they had CJ Stroud. It was an up and down year for them offensively. So it wasn't smooth sailing for the Buckeyes, even though they had a Heisman contender at quarterback who's now going to be a top 2 or 3 pick in the NFL draft in 2023. So, I mean, there's a lot of questions. It's a very interesting year. I mean, the best quarterbacks probably as you look ahead to the 2023 season are Caleb Williams, questionable defense, Drake May, questionable defense. And then who else? I mean, it's, you could go to Quinn Ewers maybe, or Dylan Gabriel maybe, Sam Hartman at Notre Dame, but just questions following every single team across the country that they're going to be favorites, but there's nobody that you look at and you're like, yes, that is the number one team. No question, no need to look or debate anything else because they've got it on lock. I don't think that's the case. You could name probably 4 or 5 teams that you could claim as the preseason number one for next season, and they're still going to have question marks following them throughout the season. So it's fascinating. I mean, again, we're not necessarily buying Oklahoma as a national title contender, but they could be a Big 12, title contender and put themselves in the mix for the college football playoff, but they still got a lot of questions to answer. One of those being, Josh, they've got some injury situations that they got to work through. We talked about Javonte Barnes this week a couple times on shows, but it looks like that he had to have surgery to clean up an issue that he's been dealing with since high school. He played the 2022 season. Now, Brent Venables didn't go into significant detail about what that issue was, but it was definitely a lower body injury, a leg issue that's got him, wrapped up and on a scooter. So there's definitely something significant there. How it impacts the rest of 2023 for Barnes, we'll see. sounds like he's probably going to be at worst limited or at best limited this spring, probably out for the rest of the spring. I can't remember exactly what the wording was that I saw, but then you go to Robert Spears Jennings, a guy that we were kind of expecting to have the, or be a part of the safety competition this spring and maybe contend for a starting job. He's going to miss the rest of the spring after having shoulder surgery. They think they'll have him back by fall camp, but he's done for the spring. So that's a bummer for him because, again, the true freshman that stood out in the fall, he was one of those guys, even though he got very limited snaps.
Yeah, and hopefully with Javonte Barnes, it is just cleanup and then back, beyond full go of whatever 2022 was for Javonte Barnes, which, oh, by the way, if he had that nagging injury from high school, I mean, looked pretty good in his freshman season at OU. So hopefully that cleanup, he's back and feels better than ever when you get around to the fall. And it is still a serious competition between him and Sawchuk, and who knows, maybe Caleb Hicks or, Smothers put their name into that hat, or Marcus Major, you got to consider there too. But that's certainly notable. Somebody having a cleanup procedure. I hate hearing that about Robert Spears Jennings.
Yeah, and Brent Venables even mentioned that he was having a really strong camp, and so you hate that for the kid. Again, I think there's a lot of promise there. It's just going to be a little bit delayed that we're going to see that. So bummer we won't get to see him in the spring game. I would bet we don't see Javonte Barnes in the spring game, even if he is kind of working back into practice by that time. I just don't think that they'll risk, any kind of re-injury or any kind of potential further damage to that with him being out. Didn't talk much about guys like Jaden Davis, who I think and Walter Rouse, who are dealing with stuff, but those will be names that we'll have to continue to watch as the spring goes along. But going to be opportunities for other players elsewhere. I mean, Peyton Bowen, he was mentioned as a player to watch by Shehan Jayaraja over at CBS Sports for the true freshman in the spring game. And that's going to be intriguing, with, Billy Bowman, Key Lawrence, Reggie Pearson, probably ahead of him on the depth chart. There's a chance Peyton Bowen can make some noise and earn himself more spots, especially if Robert Spears Jennings isn't going to be in practice. That just creates more snaps available with the twos and a chance to get some, first team snaps too there.
It does open the door, right, for a player like a Bowen to maybe make some noise ahead of schedule, which he maybe, John, was going to be on that charted course regardless. If 5-star is right, and oh, by the way, the football is easy is right. I mean, he might have already been headed that direction anyways, but that's just one more set of snaps that obviously you get that maybe you weren't going to get, or obviously Robert Spears Jennings would have been ahead of you on the depth chart. So sure. I mean, that's a name to keep an eye on out of this, no doubt.
Yeah, and then finally, Gentry Williams was back at practice. They're kind of slowly working him back after his exhaustion collapse at practice a few weeks back. So I'm sure he'll be okay. It's just one of those things that happens, especially with an exertional collapse, I think was the way it was described. But someone to keep an eye on as well. But they're deep at defensive back. It's inexperienced depth, but it's a good group that they're working with, 4- and 5-star guys in the defensive backfield. But that's going to do it for today's episode of Locked On Sooners. Thanks so much for tuning in and being a part of the show. Make sure you're subscribed to the show wherever you get your podcasts. We're free and available on all platforms and on YouTube. Hit that subscribe button and that notification bell to let you know when new episodes drop. Be here for the live show Monday night, 9 p.m. Central Time. It's always a great time in the chat. We'd love to answer your questions, go through your comments as well. But until next time, he's Josh Helmer. I'm John Williams. We'll talk to you then. Boomer Sooner.